Okay, so here's the demo of my final project. So here we have the project init page, and if I click on the screen, the device will go into MP3 mode. And here in MP3 mode, we have 5 buttons. We have volume button, 2 volume buttons, 2 sound select buttons, and 1 play button. And the screen will display the current file name and the volume. Okay, so if I press the play button, we'll play music, and we can also pause the music, and we can adjust the volume.
You need cooling.
It's a little bit too loud. Okay, and then I can select next song. And I can go back. Okay, so that's pretty much all the functions in my MP3 mode. And if I press the mode button, the device will go into Midi mode. So in Midi mode, I have 4 pads implemented, and I have a FX effect button. And so each pads here are assigned to a unique music instrument. So these 3 are percussion instrument, and this one is the melodic. And yes, and if I press on the FX button, right now I can control the pitch wheel and the panorama of the Midi through changing the orientation of my device. So for example, like this. So if I rotate my device this direction, it will change the pitch wheel of the Midi. And if I rotate this direction, it will change the panorama, which means I can switch the sound between left channels and the right sound channel. But right now, because I only have 1 speaker, so it doesn't, you can't really tell the difference. But there is. If you use a headphone, you can hear that. Yeah. Okay, so that's the function, all the function on my Midi mode. And if I press the mode again, the device will go back to MP3 mode. Okay, so let's briefly walk through the test structure for my final project. So my final project has 2 modes, which is the MP3 mode and the Midi mode. So in MP3 mode, I have 3 tasks involved, which is the GUI task that pulls the button and check which button is pressed, and then it will send out the corresponding button events through a message to MP3 control test. The MP3 control test is essentially a event-driven state machine, and will take the message from the GUI task and do whatever the behavior that correspond to that button event, such as set the volume and switch the file, or pause or resume the file streaming. But the actual streaming for the MP3 streaming is done by the MP3 task. So this is the task that actually load the MP3 file into the audio card. Okay, and then we go into Midi mode. So similarly, the GUI task will do the same thing, pull the button and check which button is pressed, and it will send the button message to a Midi task, which is also a event-driven state machine. And based on what kind of event it is, it will send out the corresponding Midi message to the audio card. And then there's another accelerometer task. So this accelerometer task is will be reading the accelerometer's sensor value, and then convert those value into the pitch wheel and panoramic values. And then it will send these 2 values to the Midi task through the message. Okay, and then we can talk about the hardware modification. So I have to modify the VS1053 because I need to be able to switch the operating mode between stereo mode and the Midi mode. So in order to switch mode, I have to configure the GPIO pin during the reset. So if the GPIO 1 is the logic is low during the reset, the audio card will boot into stereo mode. But if it's high, it will boot into Midi mode. So essentially, I just connect the GPIO 1 and the reset pin to 2 of the GPIO on our STM32, so that I can just manipulate those 2 GPIO ports and reboot and just switch mode for the audio card. And then it's the communication part. So on the data sheet, it said I can actually communicate, send out the Midi message to the audio card either through UART or through the Midi, through the SPI one. But I don't know how to do it. I couldn't figure out how to do it through SPI, so I decided to use UART to do it. And so here are the UART4 on our STM32 board, and so I just connect the TX pin to the RX pin on the audio card. Okay, and then we can talk about the task. It needs synchronization upon task create. So as you can see, we have 5 tasks to create, and each of them have different amount of things to do during the initialization process. So I would like to have them all on the same page. So so I decided to use the semaphores to synchronize all the tasks. And I create a semaphore for each task except the GUI task. So the GUI task will try to do the initialization process and then wait for all the other 4 semaphores to be signals. And all the other 4 tasks will initialize the task and then signal the semaphores. And after that, the GUI test will display the project init page that you just saw. And then the MP3 control task and Midi task will essentially just block itself because it is pending for the first message in the message queue, which is empty. And the MP3 task and the accelerometer task will be suspended. So then we can talk about the task init synchronization for the MP3 mode. Sorry. Okay, so whenever the device goes into the MP3 mode, we will always assume that the accelerometer task will still be running. So the first thing we do is to suspend the accelerometer task, no matter if it's running or not. And after that, the GUI task will set up the init value for the volume and send out the message that contains the init message to the MP3 control task. And then the MP3 control task will essentially just reboot the audio card into stereo mode and then reinitialize the MP3 controller SD card and then reading the first MP3 file. And then it will signal the semaphores to tell the GUI task, oh, I have finished my initialization process. And then the GUI task will ask for the message that contains the file name, which the MP3 control task will send it through the mailbox. So after getting all this information, the GUI task will go on and render the 6 button and displays the GUI that has like volume value and the song name. And then we can talk about the task init synchronization for the MIDI mode. So whenever the device goes into MIDI mode, we assume that the MP3 task might still be running. Sorry, give me a second. The MP3 task might still be running. So the first thing we do is to suspend the MP3 task. And then the GUI task will send out the init message to the Midi task. And the Midi task will essentially reboot the audio card into Midi mode and then set up the Midi control and the channel, which means the channel volumes and the instrument, that kind of thing. And then the Midi task will signal the semaphores to tell the GUI task that the initialization has been done. And then the GUI task will render the 6 button and goes into button polling mode. So, okay, and then we can briefly talk about task communication for the MP3 mode. So I wouldn't go into detail into the MP3 task because it's just basically the same as the assignment. So if the play button is pressed, the MP3 control task will essentially just resume the MP3 task, and it's doing all this looping and load the file into the audio card. And then if I press the pause button, the MP3 control task will suspend the MP3 task. And if the volume button is pressed, essentially GUI task will send the current volume value to the MP3 control task, and the MP3 control task will convert that value from 100% to an 8-bit value and send it to the audio card. And if the next button is pressed, the MP3 control task will suspend any current file streaming and then lock the MP3 file variable with the mutex. And then it will change the file variable to the next available MP3 file. And then it will unlock the file variable and send the file name back to the GUI task through the mailbox. And the GUI task will display the song name. And then it's the communication for MIDI mode. It is much easier. So when your finger first touch on the pad, the GUI task will send out the MIDI pad on message to the MIDI task, and MIDI task will convert that into a corresponding MIDI message and send it to audio card. And same for the pad, button off. So if your finger left the pad, the GUI task will send out the pad off message, and it will also do the same thing, send out the MIDI message. And if the FX button is turned on, the GUI task will resume the accelerometer task, and it will essentially just be a super loop that keep reading the IMU sensor value and pack the X and Y value into a message and send it back to the MIDI task. And even though super loop is pretty fast and keep putting like message into the message queue, the GUI task is still able to put the pad on or pad off message in between, and the entire system can be pretty responsive.